So excited to be partnering today with Historic Hutchinson. And what a better place. We moved the venue here because of our construction, if you haven't noticed, down at the library. It's been very, very creative for us. So we decided to move it off-site, and the depot felt like the perfect location for its history. And here, our first presentation today is going to be all about trains in Hutchinson, so I'm excited. So today we have Tim Fallon and Kate Boyd, and they're going to talk about Hutchinson and the trains. And thank you so much for coming. And if you did not get a handout today, let us know. You can share. Otherwise, we can have copies available at the library as well. And I wanted to say thank you to Val back there, who is filming today for HCBN. So if you know anyone that wasn't able to make it today, it'll be filmed and available on Channel 10, or also HCBN has a YouTube channel that you can go and watch it online. So, okay, thank you again for coming.
Yeah, there's a spot right up front. Okay, hello, and thanks for everybody for coming to the people here about the Hutch Railroads. The first thing I want to try and explain to you is, some of you have seen, oh wow, how's that? Can everybody still hear me? This handout, what's interesting about this, or what I found interesting, is you can see the three lines. You can see Milwaukee Road, what we call the loose line, and then the Great Northern. And the thing is, you notice a lot of the towns, they only have one railroad going through. Some have two. Hutchinson and the cities are the only one that has three. And this here I found in a book called Twilight's Rails by H. Roger Grant. And then the second page, this kind of gives you a general idea of where the railroads were in Hutch. The Milwaukee line is here along Jefferson. The Great Northern, the depot, which is right here, that kind of ran to the southeast. And then the loose line was on the north side of the river, and the depot, their depot, was just on the other side of the bike plant across Main Street. And the last page is kind of a little history of the Hutchinson Railroad. This is compiled by Terry Davis. Some of you probably know him. I was hoping he'd be here. She was hoping he wouldn't. We're not 100% sure about our facts, so you gotta cut us a little slack. And the other thing I found interesting is this picture here. This is from August 23rd, 1901. It's taken from a hot air balloon up over where 3M is now, looking northwest. And if you look at it along here on Jefferson, you can see the Milwaukee line. And over here, you can see the Great North. The loose line isn't here yet, obviously. Now, this is just a picture from that I printed on my printer, but if you want a really good detailed picture, you go to City Hall, and on the left side where it says administrative, just as you walk in there, up on the wall, they have a nice big one that's really detailed. And the other thing, being a Catholic, I found interesting is right there is the original Catholic Church. If you want to pass that around, please, I'd appreciate it.
Is that the church that's up by the elementary school?
No, actually, that church was moved over to where the brick church was, on Glen and Washington. And then in 1923, when they moved that church out into the street, built the brick one, and then that church, the wood was sold to a John Heenan. He disassembled it and took it out and built a house on it. That house is still standing out towards Lake Jenny. You know, it's easy to forget how important the railroad was to our town back then. Here we are 145 years later with our modern roads. And back then, isolation was a big problem for a lot of people. Excuse me. Last night, I was sitting there thinking, nowadays we have smartphones and how it's changed for many of us. I gotta think that changed a lot of things for the railroads. Today we have our cars, our trucks, our semis, our buses, our mass transit. Nowadays, you can order something and have it at your business or your doorstep the next day. We have UPS, FedEx, DHL, Amazon. I mean, you can even order your food from McDonald's and they bring it to you. But back then, in the early days of Hutchinson, if you wanted something, it could mean a trip to Minneapolis. And with a team in a wagon, that could take you 7 to 12 days. Back then, the roads were mainly dirt. And if you look at that picture, you kind of look at the roads, there is no tarred roads, it's just dirt. And when it rained, they became rut-filled mud holes, and in the winter, they were impassable. The Midwest actually developed a reputation for being the mud road states. So getting a railroad could make or break a town. It didn't guarantee you success, but you had better odds with it. And let me give you one example that I come across years ago doing family research. Now, there was a town of Collinwood, up in Wright County by Collinwood Lake. They wanted to run a railroad through there, but they couldn't get the right of way. So the railroad company just went a couple miles north and went through Dassel. And nowadays, the town of Collinwood is gone. Now, the leaders of Hutchinson, now, oh yeah, I gotta shoot something here that I found kind of interesting. Apparently, the businesses and the people in Hutchinson did not want to go to Blenco or Brown to pick up their freight from the railroads. They wanted a depot built in Sumter. Well, the Blenco paper, I think it's called the Enterprise, thought that was ridiculous. Where the Hutch leaders said, no, we need this. And pretty soon there was a war of words on print, back and forth. And at some point, they got their depot in Sumter. But I imagine a few years later is when they built the line into here. We'll get to that in a second. Now, the leaders of Hutchinson, they saw there was a railroad south of town in Broughton and one north in Dassel. And they realized if they wanted their town to survive and grow, they needed a railroad also. Just about everything you need for your personal business could be shipped in by railroad. Plus, you can ship your packages or your business products back east or out, back to the cities or out east. And some of you probably ever heard, way back then, you could literally order everything you need to build a house. It would be shipped to you on the railroad. I mean, the wood, the nails, the windows, the doors, the paint, everything. Now, not only to mention you could climb on the train in the morning, enjoy your day in the cities, then catch the train back here in Hutch, and that evening if you wanted to. So you could see a railroad could just about benefit everybody. And if you own land and the railroad came through, it was not unheard of that land would double or triple in value. So let's imagine today if we still had our railroad, and you decide you want to go to a sports event, go to the Mall of America, or go take in a show. You drive over here, you park your car, you get on the train, ride into the cities, enjoy your day, get back on the train, come back here to your vehicle. You don't have to worry about traffic, you don't have to worry about parking. You have a stress-free day. Now, the first railroad we're actually going to look into is the Chicago and Milwaukee. Now, we didn't find a lot of pictures of it, of the depot, but if you would there wasn't a lot of information on that one. Now, that's their train right there. Now, the first railroad, we're going to look at Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul, which was known as the Milwaukee Road, which ran from Minneapolis all the way to Tacoma, Washington. Now, at one point, the city of Hutchinson offered a bonus of $20,000. Now, this was in 1880s money, which today, I looked it up, it would be $565,000. Now, this money was collected through the people of Hutchinson. So $20,000 was a lot of money back then, but they wanted a railroad. And whichever railroad company got here first was supposed to get the money. Now, this is where some things can get a little confusing when you're doing research. Supposedly, the Milwaukee Road got to Hutch first, but the Great Northern got the prize. And from what I've come across is apparently the Great Northern had a train derailment, And that's what kept them from getting here first. So apparently they still got the prize. Now, there was a branch of the Milwaukee Road that came from Glencoe through Bisbee to the Hutchinson and was built about 1886. The line ran south of 3M on the south side of the old Highway 22, which I imagine a lot of you remember 22. Now it's known as Adams Street. The tracks crossed the Pearl River on the south side of the highway and ran along Adams by what is now the Pearl River Auto, and then along that small part between Adams and Jefferson by what is Richard Larchen's building, the old car wash, and Pearl Auto. The track then ran north on Jefferson all the way to 2nd Avenue, just north of where the current fire hall is. Now along these tracks, as you can see in the picture, there were several elevators, a coal building, a turntable, and an engine room, which was located about where the old car wash is. And finally, the depot was at 415 Jefferson, between 4th and 5th Avenue, about where the Alexander apartment building is located. The depot was constructed in September 1886. It was a 2-story building. It was 24 by 56 feet. There was quarters on the 2nd floor for the agent and his family. And in 1943, Milwaukee removed their stockyards. I'm not sure where the stockyards were located. I couldn't find that. Then around 1952, they removed their 44-ton, 62-foot turntable as it was no longer needed. That thing must have been something to see. Now the depot closed on February 5th, 1957. The depot building was sold. The building was then disassembled between February 7th, 1957 and December 1958, with the lumber being reused, just like the original wooden Catholic church we were talking about, which is shown in that picture. Now, if Katie's ready, we'll do the grading over there. Have something good? Are you ready? We'll do the grading over there?
All this high-tech stuff.
Now we know why they do rehearsals and
Yeah.
TV.
I'm going to back you up in history a little bit, and we'll talk about the first trains in America. And the first one was in Massachusetts in about 1826. And it was horse-drawn, and the rails were wooden. I don't know. Would that work? I guess so. But the Baltimore, Ohio, the B&O was the next one. And that was a passenger. They had the first passenger one in 1830. And their first, the first locomotive was the Tom Thumb. And if you just want to, I thought they had Wi-Fi in here, but they don't, so it's on my phone. It's just a little picture. It's not a real glamorous, wonderful locomotive, but that was the first one. In the U.S., the Louisiana Purchase happened in 1803, and the word was that people said it would take 300 years to fill that vast desert. Well, it turns out it took 30. Minnesota wouldn't be included in that. If you think about, if you know your history, 1830, that would be 1833. There was just Native Americans here at that point. But there was, if you were a farmer in Chicago and you were going to take your produce, you're a farmer 200 miles from Chicago, and you were going to take your produce to Chicago, by the time you got it there, the shipping costs would be way more than the crop was worth. And so that's what happened with the early development. Then, of course, in your history, remember 1869 at Promontory Summit in Utah was a golden spike, where they finally joined the railroads for the North and the South. So that was an important event, and mostly done by immigrant labor. We forget about that sometimes. All the railroads weren't in compliance with sizes. The rail sizes differ, and the South particularly had just short lines connecting the cotton fields with the rivers. And then during the Civil War, there was no central point for them, and so that was a real hardship for them. It probably was an advantage for the North to win the war because the railroads were so unconnected to move the labor and what, you know, the soldiers and the ammunition. The land grant system, 1855 to 1871, and that the railroads were given an amazing amount of land that they then could sell to the farmers and the bondholders. What they sold was in sort of a checkerboard area, so configuration. So, okay, so they would like sell two pieces, sell this one, and then the one in the middle would be vacant for a while. Well, guess what happened when it was vacant for a while? The price went up, right? And so then they could resell that at a higher price. So that was part of the fortunes of the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts that built their fortune, their railroad fortune. That's part of how they did it. So now I'm going to move on to the history of the Great Northern. And part of what Tim was talking about is how confusing all this was. The Great Northern had, first it was in 1857, the Minnesota and Pacific line. Then it was the St. Paul and Pacific line. Then it was the Minneapolis, St. Paul and Manitoba line. And then in 1889 it became the Great Northern, which later was way history on, became the Burlington Northern. And that, the Great Northern is connected with James J. Hill. It's another man who built his fortunes with the railroad. The Great Northern, its history is out in the Cascades and the Rockies and the trestles and the tunnels and the beautiful scenery. And they kind of forget about, you know, these little sidelines that probably were making them a lot of money. In 1886, it came to Hutchinson, there's a map that shows the line, that's the dark line on this one, and then there's a little dotted line, and I looked and I thought, well, this would be shorter. Why did they go through Lake Minnetonka area? Why did they do that? Well, in the 1880s, Lake Minnetonka was, you know, the place to go to swim and the resorts, and you moved out of Minneapolis and went out to the lake at Lake Minnetonka. So there was real traffic for that, so that's why that happened. But the railroad was in a straight line when they built it. It went from a half a mile from Silver Lake, half a mile from St. Bonifacius, but it didn't touch the cities of Mayer, New Germany, and Leicester Prairie because they didn't exist. So it was just a straight shot. And then, of course, as the railroad came through, Silver Lake would be a good example. South Silver Lake was a little community that does not exist anymore because the train, they moved the town a little bit after the train got going. The depot was built here in 1889. And if you look at various pictures, Barb brought us a sketch of one from her antiquing days, I think, huh? And here's the depot. This one you could take around. This isn't in your packet, I don't think.
It's on the wall.
But you can, oh, yeah, you can look at it on there. So you know it wasn't white. So what color was it? Yeah. Gray? I was thinking brown. I like gray. Maybe it was gray. I guess we won't probably not know. But I will show you, well, yeah. Later, in a minute, I'll show you that. So the depot then was built, and it became, it plugged along until about 1885, the railroad, and then it became the Dakota Rail for 15 years. There was a Zephyr line that, did anybody ever go on the dinner train that came from here? Did you? Okay, so that was our question. Bev at the museum, who knows everything, said that it was a loose line. Or did you mean to come out of this building? Do you remember?
No, it was in Stillwater, I remember that.
Well, that was a different one.
Was it a different one?
The other one came right over here.
Yeah, is that where you
Behind
left
the-
from?
Yeah.
Okay, so Bev does know everything, she's right. I guess we just assumed it was from here, but it was really the loose line. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And some of the early agents were Denifield, and this is the early picture of him, and it shows him with running the, yeah. They called it some, he was also the telegraph operator. And this is the son of the earlier Denifield that's in this photo. That if this is the interior, and it's kind of dark, you can't really see it real well, but it does show this building how it was earlier. The telegraph, of course, that was one way people could communicate, and during the war, I probably informed people with a loved one was killed or in prison or wounded in the military service. By the way, when I was talking about that land grant, I forgot to say that the payback for the country was that the railroad had to ship military and government personnel and goods at a cheaper price. Well, I think we probably got our money back in the 2 world wars with all the equipment and personnel that went back at a reduced price. At least I hope we did, I don't know. But another agent that maybe some of you remember was Elaine Hopkins, and she was here when the train left in 1985, and then she went on to become an agent at Wilmer. But she learned her craft at World War II, during World War II. Well, the Rail Authority is in charge of the railroads in this area. And the Railroad Authority in 1985 had a vote to disband and to get rid of this depot and the train. Dakota Rail had ceased to exist. And so, but they had a measure in their charter that said it has to be a unanimous vote. I'm pretty sure that Sheldon Neese was on that Railroad Authority. Some of you remember Sheldon. And he of course voted no, we don't want you to tear this down or whatever. So that was one of the things that helped save it. So Historic Hutch, then we were advocating that the building should also be kept. And then in 1981, there was a fire. And you want to take that one around too. What I want you to notice is the color. It wasn't white. Someone wants to restore it and add some of the color that was on it, the red and the green. And I don't know if those are railroad colors, I suspect that was part of it. Well, so now, there was a huge telegraph tower outside of the building. What was that picture?
Yeah, I think it was one of these here.
Yeah, okay, on this one. And you can just kind of see it. You don't even see the top of it standing there. Well, lightning hit that. That was the source of the fire. And I think it just came down and burned. So now we've got a building. We want to preserve it, but it's burned. And Historic Hutch helped out, I think, with the roof. And you can see how close this pole is, so the lightning would probably come right down and then burn. What you see on that picture, how it was burned around on the roof. So for 14 years, though, it kind of languished and just sat here with nothing being done. And then the Economic, Economic Development Commission took it over. And when they decided that this was going to then be the farmer's market, then it was insured to have a life then it would not be taken down. They had to move it, though. It was at a sort of, it was like this way?
Yeah, kind of an angle.
Kind of an angle this way, and then it had to be, moved this way so there'd be more room for the park, or for the farmer's market out there. At that point, we have a resource in the back room, which we'll show you after a little bit. We'll go back and show you the resource that's back there. And what it is graffiti. Now, just a little side note about all the people all our wonderful politicians that we have these days. There was a group called the McLeod County Co-op Historical. And I was on that committee at that point, and I was Historic Hutch's representative, and then there was a group from Glencoe, and there was a fellow in Stewart that was trying to remodel the Red Owl that's down there. We got together and Bailey, I can't remember Bailey's last name. Anybody remember Bailey?
I think it's Schlater.
Schlater? Yeah, Bailey Schlater. And she wrote a grant to examine the graffiti that's on the walls back there. Well, this is back to the politician now. So he gets word of this, not one of ours locally, but kind of close. Well, and then we're getting it from the Clean Water Act, the one where all these grants come through. Well, Hutchins said they were going to study graffiti. And I think in his mind it was, when railroads go by, the trains, the graffiti that's on there, the graffiti that's on bridges. Well, we stayed Jim Fahey on him to get him straight on what the graffiti really meant. So you'll see it in a few minutes. This in the back was where the coal was stored. And so there'd be piles of coal back there. And the people who worked for the railroad often went back, put their initials, put their name, maybe make a drawing on the walls back here. Some of it goes back to 1890. There's nothing profane, which kind of amazes me. Nobody, but what it all is and who all these people are. All of these tabs are people who work for the railroad. And so this is part of that research that was done by Kimberly Wortloff. And the pictures are on the museum's website of some of it back here. Some of it is hard to see. Some of it is not real lovely drawn, but they were drawing with charcoal. And part of Historic Hutch's mission, somewhere along the line, was that we were going to try and preserve this. Well, what do you put on it to preserve it? It's charcoal, chalk, kind of. Well, I was thinking about it a little bit, and I thought, I know that at the Art Institute there's a huge Tibetan monks used to take, very detailed, and theirs was chalk. They were big, and they'd make these huge pictures, and they were just very elaborate, and then they'd dump them in the river. And then they got thinking about it and thought, this is our culture, maybe we should try and preserve this. And, but how are you going to preserve this chalk and put it upright? And 3M came up with the answer, and 3M developed a product for them to preserve it, and that's you can see that at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. So I was thinking maybe that Rhea would help us here with this stuff. So you'll see that in a minute. Are you, in a little bit?
What's that?
Are you done with this thing, or do you have
No,
more?
whenever you're done.
Oh, okay. So some of it is hard to see, like I said, and it is dark back there. One of the things that you'll see when you go back, there's a large structure. And what that is the students at the New Century Academy built it's supposed to be a replica of a train car. Now, it needs paint to simulate the boards. So it doesn't quite look like a train car yet, but that's what it's supposed to be. And what its purpose is so that the people that are doing the farmers market can store their equipment in there or their signs or whatever they need, that that's all in one place. So we can kind of keep that from whatever. There's a large cartoon that I was asking Bev, who knows everything, but she didn't know either, who did it. It's kind of a crude drawing, and it's about a reward for this person that escaped from some train, and I'm pretty sure it's a made-up story. Okay, so you'll see that, and I've got my handy-dandy little light here so I can show you. I want to just mention this quick. The logo for Great Northern is the goat. Well, there's a picture of a goat on there somewhere. It's kind of a crude drawing, but you do see the horns, so you know it's a goat. And I think it's on the east wall. So, are we there? Okay. So, correct, anybody have questions before we go in, or correct us and we're in? Okay. Oh, wait, we got one more presentation. Okay. And we have a picture of the Mr. Luce, kind of a handsome looking dude. Oh,
Okay, who was that man? Mr. Luce? Oh, okay.
what? This one?
She answered my question. Oh,
Yeah.
Mr. Luce.
Where did he live? Where was that Mr. Luce from?
I'm Twin Cities, I'm sure.
I
Tim. Really know though.
Tim, which Heenan, excuse me,
What's that?
which Heenan built took the lumber and built
Oh,
the?
that would be John Eden. Josephine Fallon's father.
Oh, okay.
See, you're getting Hutchin history and family history all in the same time.
Oh, okay. The last one we're gonna do is the
And that would be.
loose line. And remember I said we didn't have a lot of pictures in the Milwaukee? It's not the same with the loose line. You want to kind of go through these different pictures of it. Now, the loose line's official name was the Electric Short Line Railroad, or Railway, sorry, but it was commonly called the loose line. The loose line was started by William Luce and his son Earl, E-R-L-E, Luce, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. In about 1908, and their first tracks appeared around Minneapolis about 1913, 5 years later. And one of the things that, the reason it took them so long is the way they built their railroad. They didn't want to go into debt, so what they would do is take investments from friends or investors or friends, and then that's how they would get money. And the way they would get the right of way is they would offer the landowner shares in the company. Well, you know, this made the building the railroad slower. It allowed them to stay debt-free. And another thing that was different about the loose line was they were the first to use the first generation gas electric motors instead of the steam-powered engines. The loose line ran from Minneapolis to Hutchinson in 1915. It went through Watertown, Winsted, and Silver Lake. Now, about the time the loose line was showing an interest in creating the line west through Hutchinson, the people in and around Hutchinson were starting to get a little annoyed with their existing railroads. They were not happy with the existing fares and the schedules of the Milwaukee line and Ferry North. And the owners of the loose line, they saw the area west of Hutchinson that was devoid of railroads and saw this as an area that could be very profitable. So the owners of the loose line planned on expanding west out of Hutchinson. Now, at the time, at this time, many people in Hutchinson also saw the advantage of this expansion for itself. They actually did a study back then, and it showed how at the current time, this is before the loose line, the reach of the farmers and businesses was about 350 square miles, where if the loose line was to completely bypass Hutchinson, that would shrink down to about 190 square miles. But if the loose line stopped in Hutch, it would increase it to 450 square miles. This study was so important that the Hutch Leader actually ran it on the front page in the March 1913 edition. Now, by May 1918, Loose Line was running 3 round trips between Hutchinson and Minneapolis. They would run special trains on certain locations, such as the Minnesota State Fair. And many passengers found they liked these trains. Cars were cleaner, more comfortable, and faster than the cars of the older railroads. And I found an interesting note. If you didn't have to go to the depot to fly down here, the train. If the train was at least 1,000 feet away, and it was during the day, all you had to do was wave your arm or just wave a rag. And when the motorman saw you, he'd get a short toot on the whistle, and then you knew they saw you. And then at night you'd wave a lantern. Now I don't know if this applied to all railroads, but a lot of us probably remember the old show Petticoat Junction, and they would talk about flagging down the cannonball. And maybe that's where that came from. Now in 1922, the loose line continued west to Cosmos, and in 1923 it arrived in Lake Lillian and ended in Gluck in 1927. Now I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that town right, but now the owners of the loose line had good timing, as when they looked to expand west, there was an agricultural boom. So many farmers and businesses saw an economic increase in their business. Local banks and businesses saw a boost in their business. And as mentioned before, the value of land along railroad saw a large increase in value. One such business was I think I have a picture, but maybe it's in there somewhere, of the Hutchinson Brick and Tile Company. And this is from about the This is about the 1940s, and you'll see this here's a loose line, came in here, and this goes north. This Highway 7's up here, and this goes to what in my day was the Rockade side. And that was the Hutchinson Brick and Tile Company. And that spur was built in 1920. It shipped out 1,000 carloads of brick and clay products annually. Now, despite all this, in June of 1923, the board of directors became involved in a corporate reorganization. This brought a change in name. It was no longer the Loose Line Railway, but now it would be known as the Minnesota Western Railroad. Now, some wanted to call it the Minnesota, Hutchinson, and Western Railroad, but the company officials didn't agree. Now at the time, the railroad was no longer running 3 trains daily, but had reduced it to one run between Minneapolis and Lake Lillian and one between Minneapolis and Hutchinson. Now, after the railroad reached Gluck, the Luces decided to leave the Minnesota Western to concentrate on their real estate ventures. Now, once again, the Luces seemed to have good timing, as 2 years later was the beginning of the Great Depression. This severely reduced the railroad's revenues. So in 1932, the Minnesota Western Railroad went into receivership. The railroad changed its name to the Minnesota Western Railway, and in 1959 it became the Minneapolis Industrial Railway. By the 1970s, most of the tracks west of Plymouth had been retired. The railroad came into Hutchinson on the north side of the Crow River. While most of the tracks are gone, there is still a small section between the Hilliard Building and Pro Maintenance Building off Michigan Street. The railroad continued west with the track just south of Valley View Apartments. It crossed Adams and Bluff along the river, crossing over Main Street by the light plant, and then continuing west out of town. The Loose Line Depot was located at 15 3rd Avenue Northwest, about where the Southwest Initiative Building is now. And it was built about between January and April of 1916. It was a typical two-story building with wide loading platforms on 3 sides, with one side having benches and a canopy for the comfort of the passengers. It was well lit by large bracket lamps and reflectors for safety. It was kind of a typical railroad depot. Now, the depot was torn down in May 1970, but there's no known artifacts. Now, like the Milwaukee line, the Loose Line may have become just another forgotten railroad, Minnesota railroad. But luckily, it became part of the Minnesota Rails to Trails system in 1976, and which is now a 65-mile recreational path between Plymouth and Cosmos. The public can ride their bicycles, hike, ride horses, during the winter cross-country ski or snowmobile on it. And it can be a peaceful, beautiful journey from town to town for everyone. Now, while this concludes our talk about the Loose Line, before I go, I want to thank Terry Davis and the former Hutchinson leader for the vast articles and information they created on all 3 railroads. This has made these talks possible. I also want to thank H. Roger Grant for his book, Twilight Radios. This book helped me learn a lot about the Loose Line. These pictures you have showing the 3 railroads, their routes in Central America, or Central Minnesota, sorry. And finally, a big thank you to the Powell County Historical Society and Bev for finding vast amounts of information for us, and especially all of you for taking your time to come here. Now, one other thing I want to hand out. This is a picture of the Loose Line Depot before they tore it down. You can kind of see its better days. And here's this, that's the one I was looking for. That's the Hutchinson Tile. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say a little bit of Loose Line. In 64, I started working on at Stearnswood Lumber, and Loose Line went right by there, and I couldn't even count the loads of lumber we got in, and that was one of my main jobs, was unloading all the boxcars of lumber. And in 65, the flood came here, and we were expecting some loads in, and they couldn't get here because of the flood, and a lot of it was underwater. So we had to take trucks down to Mound at Stubbs Bay and unload them there and truck it all the way back to Hutch.
Yeah, that flood, I remember that as a kid. You couldn't get from one side of Hutch to the other.
When did they move then? When did Stearnswood move?
Well, they were, way back when I was a kid, they were on Main Street where, would be 2nd Avenue and Main Street on the south side there. And then they had a big cabinet shop there also. Then they moved on the north side of the river and built, I actually worked in the box factory, and then the lumberyard was right on the west side of that, so we were both getting lumber there. So I unloaded a lot of boxcars when it was 20 below zero out there, and unloaded a lot with Dale Kenning. I don't know if anybody knows him, but him and I were pretty good friends after all that work we did. Yeah, it was quite the experience to go down there to Stubbs Bay and unload all that and haul it back to Hutch.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it reminded me there's a question. The Powell County Historical Society wants us to ask you all, does any of you remember where the turntable for the Loose Line was? Or if you know someone who might know.
I've been here since 47. I don't recall ever seeing that turntable, but I remember the people down there, you know, quite a bit. And it sat right there, right north of the Little Crow statue.
Yeah,
But the turntable for this,
for the,
I forgot to say, was on Ontario and Third. So this morning I drove down there, but it's kind of a dead end, but I think it's probably that, the ball field down there.
Yeah. Well, the line that came in from Glencoe along Jefferson Street there, you were saying what was down there, and there was also a grain elevator there, and I sat and watched it, and I sat burnt down.
Yeah. See, and if you take Jim Fahey's tour, he talks about there's old houses, and then you get to that section where the depot was, and it's all 50s because
Yeah.
the line was abandoned and they built all those apartments out on Jefferson and the houses.
Then also there was a grain elevator in Biskie along the railroad there too, and I don't recall if that burnt down or if they tore it down, but there was a grain elevator there too.
yeah, I know that picture that was passing out on Jefferson, a lot of grain elevators.
Yeah, there were 3 of them, weren't there?
Yeah, 3 or 4.
3 or 4 back in.
Now, I have one question. This isn't part of the railroad, but me and my sister, that's my sister Bernadette, we stumbled on this here is a railroad park, or a fireman's park down by Main Street. If anybody has any idea where they came from, what I've heard is at some point a homeowner had built himself miniature church out of stone, and he donated it to the city. And I guess at some point it was sitting down there, and supposedly around 2000, whenever they redid Fireman's Park, that's when they stood it up and put it in the ground. But they don't remember who did it or when or any of that, so that's one of my little mysteries that I'm trying to, if you want to pass those around. But then we'll turn it over to Kate.
No, I think that's.
Oh.
At one time, there must have been a spur that went from here down to, what is that, east? Because my dad owned the John Deere dealer here in town, Gretzky's. And he had a warehouse down there across from where Ben Jarevic's shop used to be.
Yeah.
And they would back a flatbed in there. And this was the late 60s. And we went down there and unloaded combines and stuff off that railroad car.
Oh, wow. Well, that's the thing with I should have mentioned that before, but with the railroads, the farmers, if they needed an implement, they would order them and they'd come by the railroad. Made it a lot simpler.
So wasn't the stockyard right about where this is?
The Burlington Northern Stockyards, where is it?
It's everywhere.
Yeah, is that picture floating around here somewhere? That long?
Yeah, there was a track that went right through here over to the elevator over there.
Yeah.
And the stockyard was right on the east side of the tracks.
Yeah, when you go out and if you look kind of the southeast, you'll see where all the U-Haul vehicles are. That's where the stockyard for the Great Northern was. You can see it on that picture. But if you go to the city hall, they've got a really nice one. I mean, it's really nice and clear. But I'm going to turn back over to Beth, and she's got a...
I got one more.
Oh.
My only claim to fame is that I must have been in high school, I must have been about 13. I was raised in Glencoe. And I rode the dinky from Glencoe to Hutchinson, and that's what it was called. And they had a passenger train, and I came here to do Christmas shopping. So, and it said it closed that line in 57, so that shows you how, I think it had to be one of those last years. Yeah, right, but anyway, the dinky.
Two more quick questions. It kind of answered the one about the width of the tracks.
Yeah.
Would the northern half of the
same kind of track size. You know, the Legion has this organization called the 40 and 8. And they have the big, they used to have the locomotives in the train, remember those, in the parades, in the election parades? Well, 40 and 8 refers to the track width somehow or another. But it's in France, but that